Have you ever looked at the wrapping on your pain relief bottles? Have you ever wondered why it's there? Well, just over 30 years ago, 7 people died after ingesting cyanide-laced capsules from within Tylenol bottles manufactured by Johnson & Johnson. The narrative put forth by the FBI and Johnson & Johnson through the news media at the time was that a lone madman traveled from store to store placing the cyanide in the bottles. But is that what really happened? For the last 2 years, I've been reporting on the investigation and research of Scott Bartz. Bartz is a former Johnson & Johnson employee who claims that the narrative put forth by his employer and the FBI is entirely false. Last year, on the 30th anniversary of the murders, the FBI carted Unabomber Ted Kaczynski before the cameras again in an attempt to pin the 30-year-old cold case on him. At the same time, Bartz released the book, The Tylenol Mafia, Marketing, Murder, and Johnson & Johnson, a book I should point out that Johnson & Johnson doesn't want you to read. What's in the book that Johnson & Johnson doesn't want you to know? In the book, Bartz alleges that the cyanide was actually placed in the bottle in the supply chain by a Johnson & Johnson employee, and not a lone nut traveling store to store. It alleges the FBI, Johnson & Johnson, and the news media colluded to dissuade the public away from Johnson & Johnson's full liability to a lone madman traveling store to store. Before we go to our guest today, let's take a look back at an exclusive interview I did with the author of the book.
It's been 30 years now, on September 29th, 1982, when the Tylenol murders occurred in Chicago, where local residents went to their store and bought Tylenol. And 7 people in the Chicago area that took Tylenol laced with cyanide died that day. And initially, the investigation focused on some madman who had gone to the retail stores and planted the capsules into the bottles at the stores. My research showed that the tampering had actually occurred within the distribution network for Tylenol. And of course, J&J, to avoid liability, would not want to be associated with distributing this Tylenol. Legal experts and even the federal statute says that the manufacturer of a drug is responsible for all processes, including bottling, packaging, and delivery. So if the tampering occurred within the manufacturing distribution network, J&J could have been held liable. So if it happened in the retail stores, they wouldn't.
So how quickly did the FBI and the media begin promoting this lone madman in the drugstore theory?
Immediately. There was, on the very first day, though, even a J&J spokesperson did say that the tampering could have occurred in the distribution channel. But by the next day, everyone was on the same page, stating that some madman had gone store to store and planted the capsules in the retail stores.
So you think the story was, in fact, trumped up to release Johnson & Johnson of the liability?
Well, there were two aspects at play. One, obviously, J&J has a protocol which they follow to avoid liability, and part of that protocol is to just simply hide information and to keep information.
Now, 1 year after Johnson & Johnson essentially burned Scott Bartz's book that challenged their narrative of the Tylenol murders, the FBI has been making phone calls to victims' families, telling them they have a big announcement on the 31st anniversary. Confidential sources say that the FBI will be disbanding the Tylenol Murders Task Force. Originally, over 100 FBI agents made up this task force. Now it's down to 4 agents, and soon it could be down to 0, if our sources are correct. My guest today is the daughter of one of the victims who ingested the Tylenol-laced cyanide. She can speak to us today because she isn't under a Johnson & Johnson-induced gag order like the rest of the victims' families. Michelle Rosen, welcome to WHDT World News.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Michelle, the Tylenol murders, now almost 31 years ago, still no one convicted of the crime that killed your mother, and the FBI is poised to make a big announcement very soon. What will they be telling the public regarding this cold case?
What will they be telling the public this year? I really have no idea. The confidential source, I have gotten different ideas from different people, but I think that the source that I received a phone call from this week was about them disbanding. If that is true, fine. They don't do anything anyway as far as evidence goes. And hopefully, if that is the choice and this is what they're doing, if this is for real, they end up unsealing all the documents, which conveniently are not allowed to be seen by anybody, not even victims' family members. So they're keeping that tight, that lock and seal under key, and won't release them. So hopefully, if disbanding means that they're disbanding and never looking to report anymore, well, great. But hopefully they unseal the documents. My belief is that if this is really for real, they're only doing it to release themselves of the responsibility of continuously checking in with family members, which they have not done until right now. They've never called us, they've never told us anything. They keep everything secret, and we find out with the rest of the world, and that is on mainstream media news. That's how we find out.
Now, Michelle, you're still in close contact with the victims' families.
A few of them, yeah.
And you mentioned the FBI has been in contact with them recently.
Yeah.
What have they been disclosing?
Well, my dad got a call last month, and they told him that they had an announcement for the anniversary. So I thought, well, why would you be calling in August for an announcement on September 30th? If it was anything worthwhile, why wouldn't you just tell him over the phone? Then I spoke with another victim's family who had gotten a persistent call from the FBI task force saying that they wanted the family members to come into the FBI office because they had something very important to tell them before the anniversary. Now that family, they never followed up and they never made the appointment. The FBI did not, and has not spoken to this day that I know of as of today, 5 days away from the anniversary. The FBI has not contacted them about giving them an appointment. Another victim's family, third and last out of the five, haven't heard a thing. No phone call, no appointment, no announcement, no anything. So it's very different stories for each and every family, and I find that very, very irresponsible, very disturbing, stressful, and odd.
Now, clearly, there's still pain with the loss of the family members. Obviously, your mother, she ingested the cyanide. How are they reacting to this message the FBI is intending to release?
I think everyone is either completely ignoring it, just writing off anything they have to say anymore, because they've lost once the Unabomber was accused, everyone has lost their respect at all with this case in the project. It looks like we're trying to close it, not solve it. We all know that. The problem is it stresses us out so much. Do you understand when you get a call in August saying that in 5-6 weeks from now, you'll be getting some news? Well, what is that news? And the only stress that has ever come out of this case, yes, originally, 31 years ago, we were stressed out in the beginning. It was very painful, very traumatizing, but it was ignored all these years. We never heard a thing. This case was dead all the way up until Freedom of Information Act kicked in. And once that kicked in, it's been a circus. It's been a 3-ring media circus where the FBI makes really strange and falsely accusing people.
Yeah, Michelle, I'm going to jump in because you mentioned,
sure.
I mentioned Ted Kaczynski. You brought up Ted Kaczynski again. Why would the FBI cart out the Unabomber in this instance 30 years later?
Because it would be easy for the public to believe. It would be somebody easy to point the finger to. And with all the messing around, they destroyed all the evidence. And the little bit of evidence that they keep ripping off supposedly to try to get fingerprints from and DNA from is worthless. It was all tainted. It was all handled by lab workers all back then, passed around. And there is no way they're going to get anybody's fingerprints or DNA off the evidence, what little evidence they do have. Now, you want to tell me it was the Unabomber after they didn't hand over all the evidence to Johnson & Johnson and literally burn millions and millions of bottles? I'd be okay with that. You've got no proof. They're trying to close the case.
Okay, Michelle, let's talk about Scott Bartz's book, The Tylenol Mafia. What does that book allege about the murders that would put Johnson & Johnson in a position to gag the author and literally bury the book?
Well, Scott this was another case that he has is the reason why he's not doing the book anymore. So this was another lawsuit that was going on with him and Johnson & Johnson, his loss of his job. What does he allege? Well, It's great. This is the only thing on the planet in 31 years that makes any sense. And once you read it, and once you know this very basic little things, it makes it all clear where this case could be solved today. The book solves the case, so there's no reason at all that you should be overlooking this. Regardless, it's saying that that because of my mom is the smoking gun. My mom was a 27-year-old mother of four, just gave birth at the hospital 6 days before she died. When she came home, she had a bottle of regular strength Tylenol. The Tylenol that killed everyone was extra strength. For some reason, there were 6 capsules after she died, and they took the Tylenol off the counter. They noticed there's 6 extra strength Tylenol capsules inside of her bottle. She consumed 2, one that had cyanide, one that didn't. And the 6 remaining, 4 of them were loaded with 10,000 times the lethal dosage of cyanide in those as well. So what happened and how did this happen? Well, with the lot numbers and linking all that, we discovered that this had to have happened in distribution. My mom got her capsules from the hospital that she just gave birth at. She left there with a unit dose package of 8, a 1-day supply for just giving birth, came home, had her regular strength, took these, put that in. And if it weren't for my mom, everything would be pretty questionable. Still could be solved easily, but my mom getting it from a having that unit dose package means that no madman could have gone store to store to do this, because no madman could have possibly gotten into a pharmacy at a hospital. It just couldn't have happened.
So your mother's story basically breaks the entire narrative,
yes.
And this is the link that Scott Bartz investigated in the book, which led him to write this entire very large book.
Exactly. And would you believe, I had no idea until I met Scott Bartz that even happened. Would you believe that I've lived my whole life as an 8-year-old girl that watched this whole thing happen, to living my entire life up until they reenacted this case in 2009. Do you know I never even knew those things? That all of this has been kept a secret. All of these things that they have done, I had no idea that was the smoking gun. I had no idea what her death meant for the rest of them.
So do you think
she's the smoke?
Do you think that this may be one of the reasons why the FBI is potentially disbanding the entire unit?
Yes.
Because here is the smoking gun. They do not want to address the smoking gun because it flies in the face of everything they've said for the past 30 years.
Right. And if this isn't true, why in the world haven't they called me? Why haven't they called me personally? I've done so much work and research on this. Why won't they call me and say, Ms. Rosen, we've looked up all of this, and here's the reason why this couldn't possibly have happened? Not a thing. We've handed this over to them, and all they did was reactivate a case. I mean, this is the top 3 unsolved crimes of the century. You've got 7 people dead. This is the first act of terrorism through food. This is the reason why you did your intro as wondering about the safety seals on pills. This changes everything. Safety seal is on everything. And it's not, the safety seal is not on everything to protect you. It's to protect commerce. It's to protect market share. That is what the whole point of the safety seal is, because if it happened the way that we prove that it happened, the safety seal doesn't save you. It's happening in the distribution channel or in the repackaging plants. You can put a safety seal on it all you want. It's already in there.
So let me ask you about the liability Johnson & Johnson would face if in fact it was placed in a distribution channel. What would it be? What would their liability be?
I'm not sure. First of all, they wouldn't go down as being the gold standard of crisis management. We know that. Okay, that wouldn't have happened. They would have lost their market share, which is all they cared about. $300 million in marketing after this, and that. I don't know what their liability would be. I've never spoken to a lawyer about it because I don't care what their liability is. I don't want to ever go through the song and dance of court. These people are powerful. It's big pharma. I would never be interested in having any of this. Only prove it. I just want to see the documents. That's all I want. I don't want anything from them.
So you're talking to us here on WHDT World News about this matter. Why can't other family members speak out?
If you signed the paper, I was a minor at the time. took 9 years to go through court, what they put us through hell and back, and then they settled out a week before trial. The adults in the case.
So who settled out?
My dad would have signed because it was.
Hang on. Well, Johnson and Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Johnson and
Yes.
Johnson settled out with all of the family members.
Yes.
Okay.
And they claim they love this. Where this number comes from, I have no idea, and I don't know what the story is behind it. And I will find this out too sometime in my life. Johnson & Johnson McNeil products love to announce to the media, every media, well, because the CEO of Johnson & Johnson is related to 80% of the media, but anyway, they love to announce that they paid the victims' family members $40 million. It's a number that's never been erased. They've always used that number. I received $96,000 from Johnson & Johnson to watch my mother die at 8 years old, to live my entire life without a mom. And she was a mother of 4. There were 3 other children. There are 8 children left behind. In this case, 3 people, 3 mothers died from this. And I've been told, got the most because of the fact that my mother was 27 and a mother of 4. And so if I only received $96,000 as an 8-year-old child getting this, thank you. They spent $300 million in marketing, and what they paid for the attorneys, I have no idea. But they announce every day that every article is about them paying out $40 million. We didn't see any of it, so it must have been to their lawyers because we didn't get it.
Michelle, if the FBI closes this case, what will this mean to you and your family and the other victims?
Well, it doesn't look like they're interested in solving it. So if they close it, good, because it doesn't look like they've had any interest in telling us the truth. All they do is stress us out by wrongfully accusing the next guy. Looks like they're still on the James Lewis kick, which doesn't make any sense at all. The extortion writer, an extortion writer, if you actually read the letter, didn't even have anything to do with threatening to kill for money for himself. Regardless, that's a long story in itself. There's a whole meaning behind that extortion letter, which I, of course, didn't find out until 5 years ago after I read it, because the media never announced it. If they do continue on the James Lewis kick, which they should just end, they've raided the guy's apartment. They've been on him for years. They've never found not a single bit of evidence against him or anybody else. The only evidence in the 31 years of this pointless task force saving the corporation from liability, the only thing that this pointless task force has done is told us that 7 people went to the store, bought Tylenol, and they died. That's the only bit of evidence that they have given the families in 31 years.
Now, do you stand behind the claims made in Bartz's book?
I stand behind every single bit of them. I helped do the research. I helped go in once I was brought to the light. I had not even understood the complexity of this whole thing. The tentacles, the web around this whole thing is endless. It's never ending. But going in and looking at each fact, and if you look at the book, it's 1,700 endnotes with over 800 sources. Every single thing is written from their words. These are all press releases, media announcements, police announcements, and FBI announcements. There's nothing that's made up. There's nothing in there that is just questioning. It's that we made up ourselves. This is all straight from their mouths, not ours.
Now, how have the other family members reacted to the claims in Scott's book?
Gary, everybody is so, again, stressed. I don't need me to keep sounding like the downer with that, but we are. I feel empowered by it. I will solve this, even for all of them. I will. They're so sick of the media circus that they've actually a few give the thumbs up, but don't want to have anything to do with talking about it. They just want to be left alone. And until you give them actual facts of something that happened and solve the darn thing that we keep giving you the information for, until it's solved, they all want to be left alone. We don't want new announcements. We don't want anything. The media hype that comes around it is way overwhelming.
Michelle, thanks for coming on the program today to share your story.
Thank you, Gary, for having it. I love voices like you that we can actually say the truth and figure out what we're doing, because this information is definitely suppressed from the mainstream media, who will not even cover or even mention any of this. So thank you.
All right, that was Michelle Rosen. Stay tuned. We have more news and weather in Hollywood coming up after the break.